So it would make sense that your first recorded lecture would be about the process of communication. And before we talk about that, I want to just highlight a couple of things that I think are very important. The first is that communication is considered our most important survival skill. It is considered a survival skill. And you can see how important communication has been in the last couple of days with regard to getting updates on fires and evacuation, and even further about COVID and testing and statistics and the like. So in talking about communication, there are a couple of important things I want to mention. I'm going to look at different models of communication. None of them have to do with shipbuilding, but I thought that's the best model I could find, so I'm going with that. Communication is considered, first off, a multi-layered activity or multi-layered event. And we're going to look at this a couple of different ways in class, but I think for now the best illustration that I'm going to give you is if we look at communication. I'm using this cross-section of the Earth because there are layers to it. And I have number one as being the intrapersonal level, which is the one that is kind of at the center. And by this, I mean intrapersonal communication refers to communication with yourself. Do we communicate with ourselves? Of course we do all the time. Whether you're talking to yourself out loud or you're trying to make a decision on, do I do this today or do I do that? And you go through your list of why this would be a good idea or why it wouldn't. That's all intrapersonal communication. When you kind of talk yourself up in stressful situations, say, yeah, I got this, that's intrapersonal communication. When you tell yourself that you're having a bad day and you just can't do anything right, that's also intrapersonal communication. The next layer out, so think of this also as an onion, would be interpersonal communication, which is communication with another person by definition, and it usually refers to one other person. Then we move one layer out, which would be group communication. This does get divided up into two categories, that being small group communication, which would be 3 to 5 people. And the math on this is extraordinary. When you have 5 people in a group, the potential of various conversations and who follows whom increases exponentially. It's like in the thousands. And I'm not going to quiz you on that, but just know that small group communication would be 3 to 5, and group communication would probably be about 6 to about 8 or 9. That's usually a maximum amount. And if you've ever been in a group, you know that if you're in a group of 12 people, they usually get divided into 2 groups of 6 or 3 groups of 4. The next layer out, which would be the fourth layer, is public communication, and that is really one to many, so it could be 12 or more people. Think of a standard, COMM 1 class that many of you have already taken. Speaking to a group of 25 students would be public communication, and it could be larger than that. It could be an auditorium of 100 or 200, or a stadium of, 15,000 would also be public communication. And then the last level is the jump to mass communication, which means that it now goes digitally. So, YouTube videos would now be considered mass communication. Both the Republican and the Democratic national conventions would be considered mass communication because of the media that's used in that. So this is called a concentric model, simply because it's kind of like an onion. It's got layers to it, and we start in the middle and we move out. So we're primarily responsible for the interpersonal layer, that's number 2, but we also have to talk about intrapersonal because what you say to yourself influences how you communicate with other people. Group, public, and mass communication are all separate classes. You would take those at some other time. Another model which I find really helpful, I really like this model, is what's called the dance model. I'm assuming the guy who developed it was called Mr. Dance, but I'm not exactly sure on this. This is actually a diagram of a tornado, but I think it works really well because what it's suggesting is if you start at the bottom of the tornado, and you could also look at this top down, it would be the same thing. You can see that those dots on that tornado show different points of rest or different position points. And theoretically and realistically, when we talk to people, we're never at the same place twice. So as soon as you interact with somebody and they interact back, then your relationship has moved a little bit. You've also moved a little bit. And so you can consider each of these dots as you and that other person sort of going through, for lack of a better word, going through a dance where your relationship changes. Now, does it go out or does it go in? It really doesn't matter. What I want to imply here is that you're never in the same place after each sentence. Just like when you're sitting in class, as you listen to lectures or you have a group discussion, at the end of the 75 minutes or 3 hours, however long your class is, you're not the same person that you were when you walked in to class. by that definition, at the end of the day, you're not the same person you were at the beginning. Isn't that awesome news that we're constantly changing and evolving? So this is what this model is trying to suggest. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without, of course, having Sharknado in there. So there you go. That's another way to remember the dance model is like sharks swimming around in a tornado, which of course happens all the time. The third model, the least interesting looking one, comes from ancient Greece, and this is kind of the standard what's called a linear model. This is the original model that everybody thought was the way that communication works. So you'll see in the top part it has a sender, then constructs a message that goes to the receiver. So I talk to you and say something, and then around all of that is considered noise. And noise doesn't mean physical noise like, you know, loud sounds and music. It just means anything that interferes with the message. We'll talk about these items separately in another discussion. But this is considered a very linear model because there's no, you know, there's no response from the receiver. But this was sort of the original thought as to what communication looked like. And we have Aristotle to thank for that. Thank you, Aristotle. So that's a quick overview on just a couple of models that I think sort of give you a little bit of a groundwork, framework into sort of where theories come from. And from here, in the next quick mini lecture, I will talk a little bit about the various aspects within a model of communication and see how all those sort of work together and how they work with each other and how they work against each other.